The kettle hissed softly as I stood in the kitchen, pouring boiling water into the same chipped mug I used every morning. The peppermint steam curled toward my face, a gentle warmth against the cool air that always clung to our home in November. I moved slowly, deliberately, every motion calculated, habitual. The house was modest, but it was mine. Well, ours. Though lately, I've been feeling more like a guest in my own marriage. I settled into the worn leather armchair by the window, phone in one hand, tea in the other. The mortgage app was already open, the familiar figures blinking up at me like a silent ledger of loyalty. Another $1,237 scheduled to be transferred tomorrow for a house I didn't live in, owned by people who rarely acknowledged my name unless something needed fixing or funding. 10 grand. That's what it would be by the end of the year. $10,000 sent to Mara's parents' account in slow, steady increments, all under the label of help. It was Mara who had asked, always with a pained look in her eyes and a hand resting on my arm. They're just trying to stay afloat, Caleb. They'd never ask you directly. You know that. I did know. Gerald would never ask. That would mean admitting vulnerability. Instead, he worked in well-practiced tones of politeness that disguised entitlement. Sandra didn't even use words anymore, just quiet, lingering looks like a child at a store window. Mara was the conduit. And I was the ATM with a wedding band. The phone buzzed against my palm, jolting me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Gerald. That alone was strange. He rarely called unless something had gone wrong. I thumbed the screen and brought it to my ear. Caleb, came his voice, warm, overly smooth, the kind of tone you use with someone you want to impress, but don't respect. Hey, Gerald, I replied evenly. Just calling to touch base. Everything good with you and Mara? Yeah, we're good. I sipped my tea. That's great. Listen, I just wanted to give you a heads up about Thanksgiving. We've decided to keep it really small this year. You know, just the immediate family. I didn't react immediately. I let the words hang in the air, like smoke from a candle snuffed out too early. My brain did the math before my mouth could speak. Immediate family. That included Mara, her sister, their kids. Probably Sandra's book club friends too. But not me. I see, I said calmly. Thanks for letting me know. Oh, yeah, of course. Just didn't want you to feel blindsided or anything. We figured with how busy everyone's been, it made sense to simplify. Simplify. I let the silence stretch, watching a bird land on the railing of the porch outside. Its tiny claws gripped the wood with more ownership than I had ever been allowed to show around Gerald's table. Well, I said quietly, thanks for calling. He chuckled, that low, smug laugh he used when trying to sound casual. All right then, give Mara my best. I hung up before he could say more. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't race. There was no outburst, no bitterness. Just stillness. A cold kind of clarity. I opened the banking app again. The payment was still scheduled. $1,237.08. Due tomorrow. With a few taps, I canceled the transfer. Another few taps, and I deleted the recurring payment. No message. No warning. No explanation. My eyes moved to the kitchen counter, where the mail sat in a cluttered stack. Half of it was for me. The other half was hospital bills, repair receipts, and mortgage notices addressed to the house Mara grew up in. The house I'd been quietly helping to preserve like some aging relic of their family's pride. And yet, I wasn't family. Not really. I stood and walked to the kitchen, placed my mug in the sink. It clinked gently against the porcelain. I ran the faucet for a moment, then turned it off without rinsing. I didn't feel angry. I felt unburdened. Mara wouldn't be home for a few hours. She had a client meeting, then a dinner with her firm. I imagined her laughing over wine, confident that I was home being the dependable man who always said yes. I walked back to the armchair, sat down, and stared out the window as the light shifted from silver to gray. The wind picked up. Leaves danced across the street like they were trying to run away too. The silence in the house felt different now. Not empty, honest. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval. I wasn't calculating how much love I could buy with another deposit. This was mine. And finally, I wasn't giving it away. I stared at the spreadsheet on my laptop, the cursor blinking beside a growing list of numbers. I hadn't opened this file in months, maybe longer. It was a quiet ledger of debts I'd paid on someone else's behalf. Not for recognition. Not even for gratitude. Just because. The first entry was from nearly 4 years ago. $389.76 for Sandra's emergency dental surgery. We don't have insurance, Mara had whispered, sitting beside me at the kitchen table, her hand curled around mine. Please, Caleb. Just this once. I had nodded, not out of obligation, but because love can sometimes look like sacrifice, and I was all in. I scrolled down. Water bills. A gas line replacement. A roof patch job that turned into a full replacement after Gerald tried to do it himself and nearly fell off the ladder. Then the new washer and dryer Mara insisted we gift them last Christmas, because the old ones were making too much noise and no heat. I never said no. Not once. Because somewhere in my mind, I told myself I was building something with them. That all this giving was part of being welcomed in. I thought family was earned by consistency, by being the one who showed up. But now, the numbers told a different story. I was building their legacy, not mine. Gerald had once called me the silent investor. It was during a backyard barbecue 2 summers ago. I was flipping burgers on the grill while everyone sat around drinking iced tea and pretending they didn't notice the heat or the tension between Mara and her sister. Gerald walked by with a grin and a clap on my shoulder. You're the real MVP, he said loudly. Our silent investor, right? Everyone laughed. Even Sandra, sipping wine beside the hydrangeas. I smiled too, back then. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't want to make things awkward. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, being the quiet one was still a kind of strength. But silence is only strength when it's voluntary. Now it felt more like a muzzle. I clicked back over to the mortgage file, the biggest entry of them all. I'd only just realized the full weight of it. The house had been transferred into my name temporarily during a refinancing attempt Gerald bungled last year. He said it was just for the bank, that I had the better credit score. It'll only be on paper, Caleb. Nothing changes. But I should have known better. Since then, every payment had gone through my account. Every email from the mortgage company came to me. I had assumed the paperwork would be corrected eventually, that they'd fix it. They never did. And I never pushed. Until now. I highlighted the latest line and typed beside it, canceled after exclusion. It felt cold, clinical, but somehow that formality gave me peace. A clear reason for a clean break. I stood up and stretched, joints popping softly as I moved. The air in the house was cool, crisp. November always carried a sort of quiet finality with it. The wind tapped against the window, as if asking to be let in. I left it closed. In the living room, the fireplace remained unlit. I sat in the armchair again and stared at the mantel. There were pictures, Mara in college, our wedding, a blurry snapshot of us with Gerald and Sandra at their 35th anniversary dinner. I looked at their faces now and didn't feel warmth. I felt calculation. Politeness packaged over passive dismissal. Was I really just a line item to them? A reliable balance? They never asked how I was doing. Never called unless there was a need. Never included me in the decisions. Just assumed. Assumed I would pay. Assumed I would show up. Assumed I was fine with invisibility. I wasn't. Not anymore. There was a knock at the door, just 2 short taps. I froze for a moment, then relaxed. It was the mailman, dropping a package on the porch. I waited for the sound of footsteps retreating before standing to retrieve it. It was for Mara. Something she'd ordered from a boutique in New York. I placed it on the console table and returned to my seat. I glanced at my phone. No messages. No calls. Not from Gerald. Not from Sandra. Certainly not to check on me. That was the clearest message of all. I opened the spreadsheet again and added a new note. Emotional cost. Silence. Visibility. Dignity. Then, I saved the file. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just aware. There's a cost to everything. Even generosity. And I had paid in full. But not anymore. The snow came earlier than expected. Thick flakes floated like ash outside the window, layering the porch, the steps, the world. I watched it in silence, the mug of lukewarm coffee resting untouched in my hands. It was the kind of snow that stuck, that silenced the streets, that made everything feel like it had paused. Outside, the world was blanketed in white. Inside, it was just me and the quiet. I hadn't responded to Sandra's text. I didn't need to. It had come in just after midnight, one of those messages you send when guilt keeps you awake. Just confirming that the mortgage payment went through, with a smiley face at the end, like this was a polite routine and not a lifeline she was hoping I hadn't cut. But I had. And now the silence that followed was more revealing than any apology would have been. I took another sip and leaned back into the chair. The cushion had molded to my frame after years of use, like it knew my shape better than the people I'd been giving myself to. I watched the snow fall over the roof of the house across the street, the house I had nothing to do with. Unlike the one I'd been bankrolling for years. The difference, of course, was that this house, mine, was paid with effort and principle. Theirs had been subsidized by my goodwill, now revoked. My phone buzzed again. I didn't reach for it. I knew what it would say, more questions disguised as concern, more requests wrapped in politeness. Sandra had always been good at that. Quiet, careful, conflict avoidant. She'd never raise her voice, but she could weaponize silence better than anyone I'd ever known. Her version of peace was just pretending problems didn't exist until they disappeared or someone else fixed them. I'd been that someone for too long. I set the coffee down and walked into the hallway. The thermostat clicked as the heater kicked on, trying to fight the creeping chill that had settled into the corners of the house. It was a subtle kind of cold, slow, creeping, almost unnoticed if you kept moving. But the moment you sat still, you felt it in your bones. That's what it felt like with them, like winter had been slowly taking over, frost forming beneath the surface. And now that I'd finally stepped back, it wasn't just them freezing. It was me thawing. In the guest bedroom, I stood in the doorway and stared. The bed was neatly made, throw pillows arranged just so. This room used to be for company, an afterthought. Now, it was mine. Not out of punishment. Not out of distance. But reclamation. It was the first room I'd walked into and said, "This space is mine." Mara had noticed, of course. She asked questions I didn't answer right away, her tone brittle, unsure whether to accuse or to beg. I didn't want to fight. I wanted understanding. But that wasn't something you could force. I wandered back into the living room. Baxter, my old retriever, lay curled up on his blanket near the fireplace. He looked up as I passed, tail thumping once in recognition. I paused to scratch behind his ears, and he nuzzled into my palm. "Good boy," I murmured. At least someone still looked at me like I mattered without needing anything in return. The snow was heavier now. The wind howled through the gaps in the siding. I thought about their house, 3 stories of outdated pride and aging plumbing, and wondered how cold it would get tonight. How many blankets they'd need. Whether the draft in the guest bathroom would finally turn into a pipe burst. And I didn't feel cruel. I felt finished. The difference mattered. Jonas had warned me months ago. He was my accountant. But more than that, he was one of the few friends who didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. "You're building their legacy, not yours," he'd said over beers at the bar. I brushed it off then. Thought he didn't understand the nuance of family dynamics. Turns out he understood it better than I did. I picked up my phone. Sandra's message still sat there, unopened. So did one from Mara, asking if I'd seen her mom's text. I hadn't replied to either. I wouldn't. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the table, walked to the window, and opened it just a crack. The cold air rushed in, immediate and biting. But it was honest. It didn't pretend. It didn't manipulate. It just was. I breathed it in and let it fill my lungs. Outside, the house I helped preserve was about to face a long winter without my warmth. Not because I wanted to see it fall, but because I finally understood. I was never inside it to begin with. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but watchful. Mara sat across from me, her fork moving slowly through a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables, but her appetite was a ghost. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching me, gauging, measuring, like someone bracing for a storm but unsure which way the wind would turn. I knew the moment would come. The moment she'd ask. She was never one to sit comfortably in tension. She needed resolution, even if it was paper-thin and taped together with half-truths. But I wasn't interested in taping over cracks anymore. "You've been different," she said finally, voice soft, like she was testing the weight of the words before letting them drop between us. I didn't look up. I cut another piece of chicken, chewed slowly. Swallowed. "Have I?" She set her fork down. "Don't do that. I'm not picking a fight. Didn't say you were." She exhaled sharply, folding her hands together. "You've been pulling back. Sleeping in the guest room. You barely speak when I get home. You didn't even tell me about the mortgage." That stopped me. I set my knife down carefully, then looked her in the eyes. "Did your father tell you he uninvited me to Thanksgiving?" Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Her brow furrowed. "What?" "He called me. Said they're keeping it small this year. Just family. Told me I didn't need to come." Mara blinked, her face flickering between confusion and discomfort. I don't think he meant it like that." "How did he mean it?" She paused. "Maybe he was trying to give you space. After everything you've done for them, maybe he thought." "No," I said gently, not with anger, just clarity. He said what he meant. I just finally heard it. Mara pushed her plate away, suddenly restless. You should have told me. You should have known. Her expression snapped up at that. Hurt, raw, but I wasn't trying to wound her. I was trying to peel back the veneer we'd been hiding behind for years. The one that said love meant enabling. That loyalty meant silence. I've been funding their lives, I continued. Quietly, steadily, without thanks, without expectation. But when it came time to gather, to sit at the table, I wasn't family enough. Her shoulders slumped. You could have at least warned me before canceling the payment. Like your father warned me before uninviting me. That's not the same, she said, heat rising in her voice for the first time. No, I agreed. It's worse. Because one of us was trying to protect someone, and the other was trying to erase someone. Mara looked away. Her jaw clenched, a quiet tremor in her chin. I watched her closely, not to hurt her, but to understand her. For years, she had stood between me and her parents, a buffer wrapped in compromise and guilt. But this time, I wasn't asking her to choose. I was just stepping back. I'm not angry, I said softly. I'm tired. I'm done fighting to be included while financing the privilege of being forgotten. She didn't respond. Not right away. I stood, picked up my plate, and carried it into the kitchen. The sink was half full with cold water and a few pans from the night before. I rinsed the dish, set it down, and turned off the faucet. I didn't slam anything. I didn't raise my voice. Behind me, she spoke. So what now? You sleep in the guest room, and we pretend this is normal? I turned, leaning against the counter. No pretending. I'm reclaiming space. I've given up a lot of myself trying to hold everything together. Right now, I need to hold on to what's left. She stood too, arms crossed. You didn't talk to me. And your parents don't talk to you either, I said quietly. They just decide. And you defend them, even when it hurts. That landed. I saw it in her eyes. I don't want to fight, she said again, softer this time. I'm not fighting, I replied. I'm just no longer apologizing for not being invisible. A long silence fell between us. She looked smaller somehow. Not defeated, just uncertain. And I knew then that this moment wasn't about winning. It was about telling the truth, finally, without fear of shattering the fragile glass between us. I love you, Mara, I said, meaning every word. But I won't pay to be dismissed. Not anymore. She nodded slowly, blinking back something she wouldn't let fall. I need to think. So do I. I walked past her, down the hallway, and into the guest room. The sheets were still neat from the night before. I shut the door softly behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. I wasn't angry. I wasn't cold. I was reclaiming warmth, one room at a time. The kitchen felt quieter without her. No clinking glasses, no soft humming from the hallway while she got ready for bed. Just the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional groan from the old pipes overhead. I stood in front of the stove, watching butter hiss and melt into the pan as I grilled 2 slices of sourdough, the kitchen dimly lit by the warm amber glow of the hanging pendant light. Grilled cheese and soup. Simple. Comforting. Mine. The first text came just as I flipped the sandwich. Sandra, just checking, did the mortgage payment go through? That was the second time she'd asked, and she still hadn't acknowledged the call Gerald made. No mention of Thanksgiving. No apology. Just a quiet nudge to resume the pattern. She didn't want the truth. She wanted compliance. I didn't respond. I read it twice, then locked the phone and slid it across the counter like it had nothing to do with me. Because it didn't. Not anymore. The soup simmered on the back burner, filling the room with the scent of tomatoes and basil, warm and rich. I ladled some into a bowl, slid the sandwich onto a plate, and carried both to the table. For the first time in years, I was feeding myself not out of routine, but out of choice. It felt good. It felt like something I'd forgotten. Nourishment that came without obligation. A second message came through. Gerald. Hey, just noticed the payment might have glitched. Hope all's good. Call me when you get a sec. That fake calm, the forced friendliness. As if we were buddies, as if the call where he dismissed me from the family table never happened. As if he could reset the game by pretending the rules were still in his favor. I didn't answer. I dipped the sandwich into the soup, took a bite, and let the warmth settle in. There was something deeply satisfying about this meal, something earned. It wasn't elaborate. It wasn't for show. It was real. It was enough. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it. But then the door creaked softly, and Mara stepped in. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with something like regret. She looked at the plate in front of me and then at the unused second bowl still drying in the rack beside the sink. "You didn't make me any?" she asked, almost gently. I looked up at her. "I wasn't sure you'd be eating with me." She pulled out a chair, but didn't sit. "They've been texting me too, asking what's going on." "And what did you say?" I told them I didn't know, that I'd talk to you. I nodded slowly. "That's fair." She hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you just tell them?" I wiped my hands with a napkin and leaned back in my chair. Because I wanted to see what they'd do when I stopped doing everything. And what they did was exactly what I expected. They didn't reach out because they cared. They reached out because the money stopped. She flinched at that, not because it wasn't true, but because she couldn't deny it. "I'm not trying to punish anyone, Mara," I said, softer now. "I just stopped pretending this was normal. I stopped pretending that being good to people who don't see me is love." She sat down, finally, folding her hands in front of her. "They don't know how to handle this." "I'm not sure they ever tried," I replied. She didn't argue, and that silence told me more than any defense she could have made. The phone buzzed again. I didn't need to check to know it was them. A part of me wondered if Sandra had ever looked at her phone with anxiety before, if she had ever sat by, wondering if the person on the other end was going to give her grace or cold distance. Probably not. She always sent out needs like smoke signals and trusted I'd see the fire. Mara's voice broke the silence. "They're scared." I looked at her. So was I, scared of speaking up. Scared that the second I stopped giving, I'd stop being valuable. "You're not just valuable because of what you give. Maybe not to you," I said gently. "But to them, I'm just the bridge they walk across, never thinking about who built it or how much weight it carries." She bit her lip, her eyes glossy now. "And me? You're caught in the middle," I said. "But I can't stand in that spot anymore. I can't stretch myself to keep everyone else warm while I'm freezing." Outside, the wind howled against the window pane. Inside, the heat from the soup and the sandwich lingered in the air, a quiet defiance against the cold. I picked up my fork again. "I'm not angry, Mara, but I won't keep lighting fires in homes where I'm not even welcome through the door." She didn't reply. She just reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and unapologetic. The kind of cold that stung your skin the second you stepped outside, slicing through layers like it had a grudge. I stood by the front window, cradling a mug of black coffee, watching my breath fog the glass as I peered out into the gray-blue world. The sidewalk was iced over. Snow coated the rooftops like frosting gone stale. The power lines sagged under the weight of it all. Nature, it seemed, had no patience for illusions of comfort today. Mara came down the stairs dressed in a soft cream sweater, jeans tucked into boots, hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked beautiful, familiar, and a little unsure. "I'm heading to my parents' now," she said carefully, testing my response the way one might test a patch of ice. I nodded once. "Drive slow. Roads are slick." She lingered, waiting for something more. Maybe for me to stop her, to offer a truce, or to ask her to stay. But I didn't. I couldn't. "Are you sure you don't want to come?" she asked, softer this time. I turned to face her fully. They made it clear who they wanted at the table. Her shoulders dropped a little, lips pressing into a tight line. "It's just going to be dinner. Quiet. Nothing dramatic." I nodded again. Even quieter without me. That one landed, but she didn't push. She just picked up her purse, gave a small, hopeful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and left. The door clicked shut. And for the first time on a holiday I'd once worked so hard to be part of, I felt relief. No performance. No polite conversation with Gerald that always dripped with condescension. No watching Sandra sip wine with that vaguely disappointed expression whenever I disagreed with her. No pretending I didn't notice the way they kept me on the edges of their family like a seasonal guest. Just me. And Baxter. The dog trotted over from his blanket near the radiator, tail wagging as if he, too, knew we dodged something uncomfortable. I leaned down and scratched behind his ears. "Happy Thanksgiving, buddy," I murmured. He sneezed in response. I tossed a couple logs into the fireplace and sparked it to life. The flames caught quickly, crackling into the quiet like applause. I settled into the armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket, and turned on the TV. Not a game, not the parade, just a documentary about the Arctic tundra, something slow and peaceful. It matched the tone of the day. My phone lit up on the coffee table. "Gerald, this isn't about money anymore. Call me." No greeting. No apology. Just that. It buzzed again, another call this time. I watched it ring until the screen dimmed. It wasn't about money? Then what was it about? Ego? Entitlement? Fear that the ATM had finally frozen over? They'd always believed that if they framed things in enough softness, enough passive words and careful tones, I wouldn't notice I was being drained. But I wasn't blind. I had simply chosen peace. Until peace started costing more than it gave. I silenced the phone completely and tucked it into the drawer beside the couch. Let the house ring. I walked to the kitchen, sliced some sweet potatoes, and tossed them in the oven with olive oil and cinnamon. Roasted vegetables and a simple turkey sandwich would be enough. No need for a 20-person spread when you weren't feeding expectation. Later, I poured myself a glass of cider and watched the flames from the couch. Baxter curled beside me. Outside, the weather had worsened. Power outage warnings flashed across the bottom of the TV screen. Ice storms in the county. Strong winds. Low visibility. It was the kind of night people told stories about, how the cold forced folks to reckon with the warmth they had or lacked. Somewhere across town, Mara was likely sitting in that big, drafty house with candlelight flickering over strained conversations. I wondered if they'd mention me, if they'd pretend I was the one who disappeared, rather than the one who was told to stay away. I wondered if they'd bring up the mortgage or if they'd wait until Mara left the room to whisper about the inconvenience of my silence. I didn't hate them. I just didn't believe them anymore. Another log in the fire cracked loudly, sparking briefly. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I was whole. For the first time in years, this holiday didn't feel like a performance. It felt like truth. And the truth, cold as it was, didn't require my apology. I got up, poured a second cup of cider, and stood by the window. Snow continued to fall, untouched, unbothered. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't care for approval. It just came. And stayed. It started with a text from Jonas. Just saw Gerald's house pop up on a pre-foreclosure listing. You okay? I reread the message 3 times. Not because I was surprised, but because it felt surreal to see it written out. All the whispered warnings, all the quiet warnings Jonas had given me over the years, now materialized in a single message. I set the phone down on the table and stared at the wall. Not in triumph. Not in glee. Just in silence. The kind that arrives when a structure you've propped up for years finally collapses under its own weight. The house of cards had tipped, and not because I pushed, but because I stepped away from holding it steady. The first voicemail came that afternoon. Gerald, from a different number. Probably because I had stopped answering the one he usually used. His voice was taut, trying to mask panic with authority. Caleb, look, I'm not sure what's going on with the mortgage company, but we need to talk. There might be some kind of clerical error. Call me back. Click. I saved it but didn't respond. 2 hours later, another number. Sandra, this time. Her voice was quieter, thinner. She sounded like someone trying to hold herself together while the seams frayed beneath her. Hi, Caleb. I don't know what's happening. Gerald's trying to keep things calm, but the bank called. They're talking about delinquency. I didn't realize the payments had stopped. I thought maybe it was a glitch. I'm sorry. Please call us back. Click. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, those 2 voicemails sitting in my inbox like unopened letters from a past life. I didn't delete them. I filed them into a new folder I'd created for this moment, the end of pretending. By the time the 3rd voicemail came in, it was close to midnight. Gerald again. Angry now. The polished tone was gone. This is serious, Caleb. You think you can just back out and leave us hanging? You think we deserve this? You made a commitment. Click. He hadn't even finished the sentence. And that, somehow, said everything. A commitment. That's what he called it. As if I had signed a contract in blood, bound not by love but obligation. As if my silence all those years meant consent to be used. Not a single thank you across all those payments. Not a single act of inclusion. Just expectation, dressed up in polite words. Saturday morning, Mara came home. The door opened with a soft creak, and she stepped in like the cold had followed her inside. Her cheeks were flushed, red from the wind and more than a little from emotion. She took off her coat slowly, like she didn't know what to do next. I was in the kitchen making tea. I didn't look up until she spoke. They're blaming me. I turned toward her. She stood in the hallway, eyes brimming with tears that hadn't fallen yet. They're saying I'll let you do this. That I chose you over them. That I should have stopped it. I nodded once. That sounds like them. She blinked fast, as if trying to push the tears back into place. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there while they unraveled. I poured hot water over the tea leaves and let the steam rise between us. She stepped closer. Did you really stop the payments completely? Yes. Her voice cracked. And you didn't tell me? I met her gaze. Would it have changed anything? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And then quietly, she walked over and sat at the table. I didn't want to be in the middle, she said softly. I didn't think I'd have to choose. You don't, I said. Not between them and me. You only have to choose whether you want to keep standing in the crossfire or step out of it. She buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders trembled. I stood still, letting her break in the safety of the room we built together. When she finally looked up, her eyes were rimmed red. They're going to lose the house. I sat across from her. I didn't do that, Mara. I just stopped preventing it. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as the calm, ever-steady provider, but as a man who had finally put down the weight. I sipped my tea. It was strong and a little bitter, but real. And for once, I didn't offer a solution. I offered truth. The knock came just after 7. Not the hesitant tap of a delivery man or the light rap of a neighbor. It was deliberate, firm, rhythmic. Like someone trying to remind me that they still had authority. I already knew who it was before I even stood up. I'd been expecting it ever since Mara told me they were blaming her. Ever since the voicemails stopped coming and silence replaced panic. When people like Gerald don't get what they want through charm or guilt, they escalate. They show up, not to apologize, but to control the narrative face to face. I walked to the door slowly, took a breath, and opened it. There he was, Gerald Whitaker. The man who had once toasted me at our wedding reception with a speech so generic I could have been any man marrying his daughter. The man who had smiled at me over dinners, but never once really saw me. Tonight, he looked smaller, like the cold had shaved a layer off him. His gray coat was dusted with snow, shoulders tense beneath it, jaw clenched so tightly I could hear it before he spoke. Caleb. I didn't say anything. I stepped back and opened the door wider. He didn't move. This isn't how family handles things, he said finally, eyes narrowing. You let your pride put this whole family at risk. That word again, family. They loved to invoke it when it suited them. But I'd learned something over the years. In their world, family meant service. Quiet, reliable, replaceable. I stepped aside just enough for the warm glow of the house to reach his face. Behind me, the fire crackled gently. Baxter lifted his head from the rug and blinked at the interruption, but didn't bark. Everything in here radiated warmth, peace, and none of it belonged to Gerald. No, I said calmly. I let my silence end. He blinked. What you called family, Gerald, I continued, was me paying for your comfort while being treated like a stranger. It was me covering your mortgage while being told I wasn't welcome at your table. He shifted uncomfortably. The snow was still falling behind him, swirling around the porch light like it couldn't wait to bury everything beneath it. I never meant. I cut him off with a slight shake of my head. Don't wrap this in polite language and pretend you didn't know exactly what you were doing. You made the decision. You drew the lines. I just stepped back far enough to see them clearly. His eyes hardened. So that's it. You're just going to let it fall apart. No, I replied. I just stopped being the one holding it up. He stepped forward, just a half inch. Sandra's devastated. She hasn't slept in days. Do you care about that at all? She never once asked how I was doing while I paid her bills, I said. She sent emojis and polite nudges to make sure the money came through. But she never called just to talk. Never asked if I was okay. And now that the payment stopped, she suddenly remembers my name. He exhaled sharply. You're punishing them. I stared at him. No, Gerald. I'm finally treating them the way they treated me. The wind picked up then, whistling past the corners of the porch. He looked at the house behind me, at the firelight, the framed photos on the wall, the soft hum of jazz playing from the kitchen speaker. And I saw something shift in his expression. Loss. Not just of money or security, but of control. For the first time, I wasn't asking to be included. I wasn't begging for a seat. I had created my own table, and I didn't need him at it. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets. You think this makes you better? No, I said. It just makes me free. A beat of silence passed between us, long and cold. He opened his mouth to speak again, then stopped. For once, there were no clever words. No condescension. Just a man standing in the snow, facing the house he used to count on but never valued. I stepped back and closed the door. Softly, firmly. No slam. No drama. Just the sound of a boundary being drawn and kept. Back inside, I exhaled and walked to the fireplace. Baxter wagged his tail once as I sat down beside him. The doorbell didn't ring again. Gerald had come to reclaim power. Instead, he left with the realization that it no longer lived here. I didn't hear the news from Mara. I heard it from Ruth. She called late in the afternoon, her number lighting up my phone like a surprise visitor at the gate. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since the last family function where she quietly slipped me a plate of food and said, "You always seem like you're working twice as hard for half the thanks." Back then, it felt like a strange kindness. Now, it felt like prophecy. "Hey, Caleb," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "You got a minute?" "Sure," I said, stepping out onto the porch with a fresh cup of tea. The snow had mostly melted now, leaving behind patches of slush and mud along the sidewalk. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the yard like it was reluctant to set. She didn't waste time. They sold the house. I blinked. Already. 2 days ago. Fast and quiet. Gerald told everyone it was a downsizing choice. Said they were moving into something easier to maintain. "But you know better." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, I know." She sighed. "Sandra's been crying to everyone. Talking about how you pulled the rug out. Said you ruined them." I didn't respond right away. I sipped my tea and let the steam fill the silence. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. And I meant it. "You don't sound surprised." "I'm not. The truth was always there. It just needed a cold winter to reveal it." She gave a dry laugh. "You always were calmer than most. If it were me, I would have sent that man a foreclosure notice with a bow on top." I chuckled quietly. "That's not my style." "No, it isn't," she said. Then, more softly, "But you were right, Caleb. You gave, and they never made room for you. I know what that's like." I knew she did. Ruth had been edged out of the family years ago, subtly, of course. Not through fights or accusations, but through the slow erosion of inclusion. She was too outspoken, too independent, too unwilling to conform to Gerald's idea of a harmonious household. So they forgot her. They didn't invite her to birthdays. Stopped asking for her recipes. Eventually, she just faded from the family photos. "Funny thing," I said, watching a bird hop across the wet fence line. "They're not even mad that I stopped paying. They're mad I did it without permission." "Exactly," Ruth said. "It's never about what you do. It's about who gets to control the story." I let that settle. Because it was true. For years, I had been writing checks to keep the narrative neat. To make sure everyone stayed comfortable. And the second I picked up the pen for myself, they called it betrayal. "Well," she added, "you've got one person out here who thinks you did the right thing." "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." After we hung up, I sat there a while longer, watching as the last patches of snow melted off the neighbor's roof. The icicles dripped like hourglasses, marking time in slow, measured drops. Something about it felt symbolic. The thaw always reveals what winter tried to hide. Later that evening, Mara came home. She looked different. Not broken. Not cold. Just grounded. Like someone who'd walked through fire and decided not to carry the smoke back with her. She slipped off her coat, set down her bag, and came to sit beside me on the couch. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then, softly, she said, "They think I betrayed them." I turned to face her. "Did you?" She looked down at her hands. "I don't think so. I think." I finally saw the cracks. I used to believe keeping the peace meant keeping them happy. But it wasn't peace. It was performance. I nodded. "It takes a long time to see it, and even longer to leave it." She leaned into me, resting her head against my shoulder. "I didn't stay with you to prove a point. I stayed because when everything cracked, you didn't ask me to pick sides. You just let the truth be what it was." I wrapped my arm around her. I didn't need a side. I just needed a place that felt real. She tilted her head up slightly. "You still want to be here? With you?" "Always." We sat like that for a while, the fireplace humming behind us, the walls of the house holding steady. Outside, the neighborhood lights blinked on, one by one, as the last of the daylight slipped away. Later, I checked my phone. One new voicemail. Sandra. Her voice was thin, worn, not angry, just tired. "They're saying you ruined us, Caleb," she said. "But deep down, I think they ruined themselves." Click. I didn't delete it. I just saved it in the same folder as all the others. The snow returned in waves, softer this time. Less angry. It came in quiet spirals, blanketing the ground like a fresh start instead of a burial. I watched from the front room, legs stretched out, a thick wool blanket draped across my lap. The fire cracked in the hearth, a steady rhythm that reminded me of breath, alive, persistent. Outside, the wind whispered but never demanded. Inside, there was peace. Not loud, not dramatic, just still. I had stopped waiting for apologies. Stopped expecting phone calls that acknowledged the years of quiet sacrifice. There were no gift baskets, no dramatic confessions of guilt, just space, new and wide in mine. And somehow that was enough. Mara visited her parents a few times since the house sold. She never stayed long. Said the new apartment was cramped, the energy different. Gerald had tried to downplay it as a strategic move, but everyone knew. The pride had crumbled. The illusion was sold off piece by piece. Still, Mara went. She wasn't visiting out of duty anymore. It was something else, something I never questioned, because she always came home. Today, she was out with a friend from work. The house was mine again for a few quiet hours. I made tea, green with honey, and brought it to the living room. Baxter lay curled on the rug near the fire, one paw tucked under his snout, breathing slow and content. A soft jazz playlist hummed from the speaker in the corner. I didn't miss the chaos, the guilt, the cycle of needing and giving and pretending it was all part of love. I didn't miss Gerald's forced smiles or Sandra's carefully worded texts that always asked but never offered. I didn't miss being the invisible pillar. I missed nothing. I just breathed deeper, worked less, read more. I had picked up an old copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and left it by the armchair. That was the thing about reclaiming time. You rediscovered the corners of yourself that had been shelved for the sake of others. As I sipped my tea, my phone buzzed on the side table. A voicemail. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I didn't rush to play it. I let it sit there, a small digital stone waiting to be turned over. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then I picked it up and hit play. Sandra. Her voice was quiet, strained, but not performative. Caleb, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. We were wrong. You didn't deserve that. Any of it. She paused. No crying. No pleading. Just that same quiet voice, the one I used to think was just careful, now finally sounding human. I don't expect you to call back. I just needed to say it. Click. I stared at the screen for a long time after it went dark. Not because I didn't believe her, but because it was the first thing they'd said that didn't come with strings. I saved the voicemail. Then I set the phone down without replying. Some things didn't need a return message. I stood and walked to the fire, tossed another log on, and sat back. The warmth reached my toes first, then moved up, wrapping me in something far more sincere than forced forgiveness. Outside, the snow had picked up again. Flakes drifting sideways in lazy arcs, settling into the yard like old memories finally finding rest. I watched them fall, feeling none of the tightness that used to pull at my chest during the holidays. There was no room for that now. The house, my house, was full of breath and quiet and presence. Mara came home later that night. She stepped in, cheeks red from the cold, eyes soft when they found me still seated by the fire. She didn't say much, just walked over, kissed my temple, and curled into the couch beside me like she belonged there. She did. We sat like that, shoulder to shoulder, watching the flames flicker. I heard from Mom, she said after a long while. I know, I said. She glanced at me. You listened to it? I nodded. I saved it, but didn't respond? No. She nodded again, slowly. Good. We didn't talk about it after that. There was nothing left to dissect. No resentment. No plans to mend what was never whole to begin with. We had done enough talking. Enough bending. Now came the part where we lived without apology. She fell asleep beside me on the couch, head resting gently on my shoulder, her breathing steady. Baxter sighed and shifted near the fire. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing the house in soft, invisible waves. And inside? Inside, it had never been warmer.